All right. Thank y'all for being with us today. My name is Robin Waits. I'm the Executive Director with Historic Columbia, and I am joined this afternoon by Meg Southern and Sarah Simmons to talk a little bit about historic preservation and community engagement as it relates to HC. One of our organizational goals is to ensure that our built history is protected and the stories about these historic places are told, but it's also to ensure that places that are iconic in our community are not just used as historic house museums or kind of seen as precious, but used as viable places for businesses and cool places to gather as well. So we're really excited about some of the activity that's been going on Main Street and Vista, and hopefully what may happen soon in Five Points in terms of turning some of these historic places into really dynamic and interesting, engaging places for folks to gather. And both Meg and Sarah have a lot of experience with that, and wanted to, before we start off our conversation, just invite Meg and Sarah to say hi and introduce themselves, and then we'll kick off our conversation.
Sarah, I'll let you go first.
Cut.
Hi, I'm Meg Southern. I'm a former graduate assistant at Historic Columbia. I came to Columbia to be a graduate student at USC and was lucky enough to have an assistantship with Historic Columbia, which in a way kind of was responsible for keeping me here post-graduation. Just fell in love with the city and the great folks here and all of the exciting preservation work that was happening here. And now I work as the marketing manager and historic preservation consultant for Garvin Design Group in the Vista.
Awesome. Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Simmons, and I am a local chef in Columbia. I'm from here and went off to college and then lived in Atlanta and lived in New York City. And my favorite parts of those cities were the old historic parts. And so when I moved back here, it was really important for me to, live and play and work where we have all of our, the historic buildings that have been preserved, which is a big part of what we look for when we're looking for restaurants spaces. And I think that the preservation of the historic buildings in Columbia is one of the things I love the most about the city because it makes us different. It's, a lot of the other markets, especially in the state, have, torn down their historic buildings and built, new, shiny, tall buildings, and it makes them all look a little bit the same. And so Columbia has a different aesthetic to it, and I love that.
Awesome. Thank y'all. So we're having this interview today, I think I forgot to mention, to bring people together around Midlands Gives, which is a 24-hour day of philanthropy that we're encouraging folks to support all sorts of nonprofits in Columbia. And Historic Columbia is certainly one of those that we hope folks will go and to the website and make a contribution today. So we're gonna start off the conversation with Meg, just talking a little bit about, Garvin Design has been involved in the rehabilitation of some of the most iconic buildings in Columbia. Do you have a favorite among those projects that Garvin has worked on that you can tell us a little bit about?
It's hard to choose a favorite, and I will say that Garvin Design Group has worked on a lot of those iconic historic buildings, like you said, Robin, before I joined the firm, and so I didn't get to be involved with all of them. But one of my favorites that I got to be part of is 1649 Main Street, which we know as Hendricks and now the Woody. It's right on the corner of Blanding and Main, which makes it part of our great Main Street district. It's, walkable from pretty much anywhere downtown, even from the Vista. I love that project because it had so many different lives and a very long history. It's one of the oldest buildings on Main Street. So it dates to the mid-19th century. And I think one of my favorite things about that project is that it looked so bad when we started that project. It had been through lots of different, like I said, different lives with different businesses, and there'd been lots of different alterations to the building and additions that weren't always so aesthetically pleasing. And it was great to get to be part of its kind of come up and be part of Main Street's revitalization, pushing north. There's been so much great work done on that 1600 block already, and it was great to be part of that continuance of that work and to get to move great things happening northward on Main Street. So I love that that building now kind of anchors that corner and lets us kind of get a prediction of what's going to come on blocks northward. And I love that it's just become a really revitalized place. The space is really vibrant. Garvin Design did some really creative things with the rooftop and just opening up the space and making it feel really open to the street and bringing a lot of natural daylight into it. I think it's a gorgeous rehabilitation in of itself, but it has so many great stories connected to it. I've met so many people in Colombia who want to tell us about their time at Hennessy's and going to Roof Hardware back when it was the hardware store. And that's one of my favorite things I think about preservation generally is it's an opportunity for us to share stories about places that we love.
And y'all do such a great job, I think, ensuring that the integrity of historic places is retained and that the stories are part of the contemporary narrative. Right? So a couple of years ago, y'all were involved in rehabilitating a collection of properties in the Vista, which I think were sort of underutilized and not recognized as the really incredible spaces that they are today. Will you talk a little bit about kind of what's special about that recent project?
So that group of buildings is called City Market, and it's had that name with a couple of different tenants leading up to this incarnation of that space. I think a lot of people in Colombia will recognize it as City Market Antique Mall. And it used to be, those three buildings right next to each other used to be kind of unified by one facade. It looks really different now than it did even 10 years ago. And what I love about that project is that it reinvigorated the whole block. It's a complex of three buildings. And what makes it special from a historic standpoint, I think, is that it has these really great building footprints, especially the building on the far left as you look at the facade. So if you're standing on Gervais Street, it's the one on the far left, and that's Twisted Spur Brewing. And then there's an event venue in the back called City Market Place. And that building in particular has a slanted footprint. So it faces Gervais Street, but it would have paralleled the rail line back when there were railways like crisscrossing the Vista, which I think is just such a fantastic kind of callback to Colombia's past and is a real pointer to the way our whole city developed. So there's some kind of cool urban planning history there that is really visible. And then, as Sarah knows, there's a lot of great outdoor space in that whole complex. Mm-hmm. Retained a lot of brick pavers. There's some space between the building that's now Grill Marks and then where Sarah's great cafe is, smallSUGAR. There's an alleyway with string lights. And what I love about its present incarnation is that it's kind of a pedestrian oasis in the Vista. So it used to be a place that you didn't really want to walk as you're walking through the vistas, maybe not as far as you wouldn't go quite that far, I think, down Gervais Street. But now it's become a destination. It's a place you want to go and it's a place you want to hang out. Because it has such a sense of place, it has such a sense of authenticity, and I think that's because it's historic.
Yeah, I loved the holiday market that y'all did down there, and just trying to activate all of those spaces together, where you utilize the alleys in ways that are not just for parking, but to really ensure that people can get up close to the different aspects of each of those buildings. So it's an incredible project, and I think one that sets a high mark for other preservation efforts in Colombia. So thank y'all for that work. And clearly, Sarah, there was something special that you found about that property and area. Will you talk a little bit about why you decided to settle down in the Vista?
Well, I mean, coming from New York to Colombia, there was a sharp change from city life to different kinds of city life. And when we were first living here, we were living, in my parents' neighborhood, and which is a little quieter, a little too quiet. And moving downtown for us was important because we realized, or I guess we didn't realize, how much we missed the vibrance and the energy from the city. And so this being the entertainment and arts district really has that vibrancy that gives us an extra pep in our step. And so, we first came down to this area just to look at a restaurant space, and then Scott showed us the apartments next door, and we were like, we want an apartment here, and then ended up moving into that apartment, and then moving into the apartment next to that afterwards, and then taking the first apartment as our office, just because we really are, we're all in here. We opened smallSUGAR here, and we love the neighborhood. I think it's so cool when I tell people that I live in what was the former vegetable depot. And, I think that the Garvin design team did a great job in like preserving, and then actually like preserving the archway, which was the loading dock for the vegetable depot, and then restoring it. So like it's something that easily could have just been ripped out, but they kept it and then made it better. And I love that. I mean, when we saw the alley, one of the reasons why we wanted to take both apartments is so we didn't have to ask permission or make our neighbor mad when we wanted to have dinners in the alley, because it's just such a beautiful setting for us, an intimate dinner. And I got to see that vision come to life when we did the Kugels and Collar dinner for Historic Columbia, and it was exactly how I imagined. And we're so excited to be able to do that and host dinners for other folks in the alley. It's just a really special place, and you really, not that you don't want to be in Columbia, but there's always a little bit of charm and uniqueness to something when you can step just like 10 feet away into an alley and feel like you're in a different place. And I feel like that's what this alley does for you. I love it. I love that the lore is that smallSUGAR was the meat packing facility. And it makes sense because in the downstairs basement area, there are still like hooks in the beams for where they supposedly would have been hanging meat. So I can't see any other reason for the hooks to be there. So it makes sense. It makes for a good story, whether it's true or not. I don't know. Tell me.
Well, you touched a little bit on the Kugels and College Center that y'all hosted in the alley last year, but you certainly have been a great supporter of Historic Columbia in all sorts of ways. And that Kugels and College dinner was a really special way to bring your, I think, talents to the fore, as well as bring a bunch of your friends from other parts of the country, as well as here to really make us feel like we're in a place that is far beyond what we would traditionally think Columbia is. So thanks for all the support that you have provided for us and all that you do. I love during this crazy time right now when you can't have people in your restaurant, that you are helping serve and connect to make sure that people have meals, and that you're really focused on your Feed the City projects that ensure that not only are you feeding people who can pay for it, but you're taking care of the frontline folks and people who may not have enough resources to put food on their table. So thank you for being such a bright light in this community.
It is our pleasure.
Really right now. So Meg, you mentioned early on you got involved with Historic Columbia as a youngster. How has that experience, knowing HC 10 years ago, kind of influenced where you are today?
Yeah, I mentioned in
How long has it been? 10 years?
Not quite. I started my assistantship with you in 2013, so 7 years ago, which still seems like a really long time ago. I mentioned when I introduced myself that I came to Columbia to go to graduate school at USC, and I was in the history department for my master's, and I was so excited about getting to do my assistantship with Historic Columbia, because it was, for me, kind of my first real introduction to Columbia itself. I think it's easy as a graduate student, given the volume of work that you have all the time and the pressure kind of the academy, to get a little bit siloed and just stay within the academy and not really get involved in the community. And so Historic Columbia served, I think, as my first foray into getting really involved in things that were happening in the city. And by dint of its mission, I got to know Columbia really, really well because of my assistantship with Historic Columbia. And I have to say that the timing could not have been better. I think that it was really important that I got to be at Historic Columbia as you were undertaking the big rebrand that happened. So everybody at Historic Columbia was having really big conversations about mission and the future of the organization, and how you were going to live that mission out in a way that served 21st century purposes, which I think is a big challenge for organizations like Historic Columbia, who are focused on history but want to be current. And so that was a great time, I think, as a young person interested in history, but with most of my experience being really academic. It was really important, I think, for me as a practitioner to get to be part of that conversation. And what I have always admired about Historic Columbia is its commitment to accessibility, to making history really not just referential, but a resource for the wider community, and really being committed to getting lots of voices at the table, and telling stories that are not just about like old rich white men in beautiful houses. I think that has been exceedingly important for us. So the rebrand, I think, was kind of a symbolic watershed moment for the organization. But even beyond just fonts and colors and marketing materials, there was a really important conversation happening at the time. And it was, I think, really formative for me to get to be there for that. And has always inspired me, I think, to look for projects that have some community impact, that are not just serving a very small portion of the population, but that have a bigger and wider impact for people of all stripes. That has been, I would say, probably the deepest lasting impact of my time with y'all, and that's a really great thing, I think. So I'm proud to now be a member of Palladium, and to be involved in that organization. That has been one of my favorite professional networks to be part of here in Columbia. There's just so many great folks who are really, I think, galvanized and motivated by what Historic Columbia is up to. And it's exciting to get to be part of that fresh energy.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you bringing that to the table for us and to the city more broadly. And Sarah, again, thanks for everything that you do to help not just HC, but all sorts of other organizations around the city center. Meg, we're glad that you brought your talents back to Columbia in the first place, and back to Columbia, and appreciate all the ways that you're engaged with HC. And Sarah, glad also as a Columbia girl who went off to the big city and brought all your talents back to us. We're delighted to have you back in multiple historic places and making beautiful food that makes us all, I think, happy and feel better about who we are. So today is a day certainly to celebrate the partnerships that Historic Columbia has had, that has enabled us to find the level of success that we are experiencing right now. Just like I think other organizations in the nonprofit and for-profit world, the COVID crisis has hit us pretty hard. But we are committed to maintaining the core values of the organization and moving forward in ways that may be a little bit different, but still committed to the same values that we have as an organization. So those of you out there who are interested in making a contribution to HC today through Midlands Gives, we certainly appreciate the consideration of your support. If you go to the Midlands Gives website, you can find Historic Columbia there and make a contribution from $10 to whatever your limit may be beyond that. Sarah and Meg, thanks again for being with us this afternoon, and thanks for your support.
Always.
Thanks for having us, Rob.